Mark sat in his small living room, the hum of the city outside a distant backdrop to his thoughts. It had been another long, uneventful day at work, and now the night stretched before him like a quiet void. He liked it that way. No interruptions, no distractions, just peace. But tonight, something felt different. A storm had rolled in earlier, and the steady sound of rain tapping against the window had become his evening soundtrack. He was flipping mindlessly through TV channels when, without warning, the power cut out. The soft glow of the city outside vanished, plunging his apartment into a thick, inky darkness. "Damn it," Mark muttered, reaching for his phone to use as a flashlight. As he stood to check the fuse box, a bright flash lit up the sky, casting strange shadows across his apartment. He rushed to the window, pulling aside the curtain, only to see something that stopped him dead in his tracks. Outside, just beyond the fence in his small backyard, was a glowing orb, and moving toward it were two figures, tall, slender, and unmistakably not human. His heart pounded in his chest as he stepped back from the window. Were those aliens? Before he could even process what he had seen, there was a soft knock at his door. Mark hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Another knock, firmer this time. Mark cautiously opened the door, peeking through the crack. His eyes widened as he took in the sight of the two women standing there. They were tall, their blue skin shimmering under the faint light of his phone. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and they were wrapped in what looked like thin, metallic fabric. The taller one had silver hair cascading down her back, while the shorter one's hair shimmered like gold. "Hello," the taller one said, her voice smooth and melodious, as if it was designed to calm him. "May we come in?" Mark's mind screamed at him to slam the door, but instead he found himself nodding and stepping aside. The women entered his apartment, their movements fluid and graceful, almost as if they were gliding. "We mean no harm," the shorter one said, smiling as she looked around his small, cluttered apartment. "We are travelers, and we seek shelter for a short time." Mark finally found his voice. "Travelers? From where?" The silver-haired woman smiled, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "Far from here?" "Very far." Mark's mind reeled. This had to be a dream. There was no way these two women, aliens no less, were standing in his apartment. Yet everything about them seemed so real. The warmth of their presence, the subtle glow of their skin, it was all too vivid to be a figment of his imagination. "We are curious about your world," the golden-haired one said, stepping closer to Mark. "About your people." Mark's pulse quickened. "You're not here to hurt anyone, are you?" The silver-haired one, Elena, shook her head. "No, we are peaceful. We come from a world that values knowledge and understanding above all else." Naya, the shorter one, stepped even closer, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "And you are different from the others we have observed." Mark swallowed hard, the tension in the room rising with every passing second. "Different? How?" "You are open," Elena said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You welcome the unknown without fear." Mark couldn't help but chuckle nervously. "I'm not sure about that. This is, a lot to take in." Naya smiled, her gaze locking onto his. "You're doing well so far." For the next few minutes, Mark asked questions, trying to make sense of their presence. He learned that they were from a distant planet, one with harsh conditions that had forced them to seek refuge elsewhere. They had traveled across galaxies, using advanced technology to navigate the stars. But there was something more, something they weren't telling him. As the conversation flowed, Mark found himself drawn to them in a way he couldn't explain. There was a softness to their voices, a gentleness in the way they moved, but also an underlying tension that he couldn't ignore. It was as if they were waiting for something, some kind of signal. "Tell us more about your people," Elena said, her voice low and almost seductive. "How do you form relationships? How do you connect?" Mark blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone. "Well, that's a big question," he said with a nervous laugh. "It's complicated." Naya's lips curled into a playful smile. "Complicated? How so?" Mark rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. It's just humans. We don't always express what we feel. We have these social rules, about what's appropriate and what's not. Elena tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. Appropriate? Do you mean physical boundaries? Mark nodded, trying to ignore the way his heart was racing. Yeah, we don't usually get too close to people we've just met. Naya stepped even closer, her fingers lightly brushing against his arm. The touch was electric, sending a shiver down his spine. Is that so? What if we want to get closer? Mark's heart pounded in his chest. I guess it depends on the situation. Elena's gaze softened as she watched Mark's reaction. We come from a world where closeness is a sign of trust and connection. Physical boundaries are different there. Mark tried to focus, but Naya's fingers, tracing his arm, made it difficult. Different how? Naya smiled. We express ourselves freely. When we trust someone, we show it. There's no hesitation, no fear. Elena added, we value openness. Vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. Here it seems, you hide your feelings. Mark took a deep breath, his mind racing. Yeah, I guess we do. Naya's eyes twinkled mischievously. Would you like to learn our ways, Mark? We could teach you. Mark couldn't deny the pull he felt toward them. There was something magnetic about their presence, something that made him want to let go of all the rules and just be. But this was all happening so fast. I don't even know you, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Elena smiled softly. But you want to. Before Mark could respond, Naya leaned in, her lips lightly brushing his in a gentle, almost exploratory kiss. Mark's mind went blank as the warmth of the moment took over, their closeness creating an undeniable connection. Elena stepped forward, her hand resting on his chest as she watched them, with a soft, approving smile. The kiss was brief but electric, leaving Mark breathless. He began, but the words wouldn't come. He felt Elena's hand move gently to his face, her thumb grazing his jawline as she leaned in to place a soft kiss on his cheek. You're different, Mark. Open, trusting, she whispered. But just as the tension reached its peak, a loud bang from outside shattered the moment. Mark jumped, his heart pounding as he turned toward the window. What the hell was that? Elena and Naya exchanged a glance, their playful expressions turning serious in an instant. We need to leave, Elena said, her voice now calm but urgent. Mark blinked, confused by the sudden shift. What's going on? Naya moved toward the door, her eyes scanning the outside world. They found us. Mark's stomach twisted. Who? Elena turned to him, her expression hard. We haven't been entirely truthful with you, Mark. We're not just travelers. We're fugitives. Mark's mind reeled. Fugitives? From what? Before Elena could answer, another loud crash echoed from the street. Naya grabbed Mark's arm. We don't have time to explain. You need to come with us, now. Mark hesitated, but the fear in their eyes was real, and it sent a jolt of adrenaline through his system. Where are we going? Elena moved to the door, her eyes glowing with intensity. Somewhere safe, but you need to trust us. Mark glanced between them, his mind spinning. He didn't know if he could trust them. He barely knew them. But something told him that whatever was happening outside was far more dangerous than anything they could throw at him. Okay, he said, his voice firm. I'm with you. Mark, following closely behind Elena and Naya, rushed toward the door. His heart was still pounding from the intensity of the earlier encounter. Part excitement, part confusion. But now a new kind of fear had gripped him. He didn't know exactly what kind of danger they were in, but he could feel it closing in fast. When they stepped outside, the sight that greeted them was unsettling. The storm had quieted, but the sky above was glowing with an eerie green light. It wasn't natural. Mark was sure of that. Whatever it was, it had something to do with them. Who's after you? Mark asked, trying to steady his breathing as he scanned the dark street. His mind was racing, flooded with questions he didn't have answers to yet. Naya paused for a moment, her sharp eyes darting around the street as if she could sense something approaching. They want to capture us, to take us back. They're the ones who destroyed our home. Elena stepped closer to Mark, her touch light on his arm but firm enough to get his attention. Her eyes met his, filled with a seriousness that sent a shiver down his spine. Mark, you need to understand. This threat isn't just to us. It could be to you as well. If you stay with us, you could be in danger. Mark blinked, his mind trying to catch up with everything happening. Danger? He had only just met them, and now he was being pulled into something much bigger than he could have imagined. But there was something about Elena and Naya, something that made him want to trust them, to protect them. I'm not going to leave you guys, he said, his voice firmer than he expected. What do we need to do? Naya smiled, her eyes flashing with a mix of relief and admiration. We need to get somewhere safe, but we can't stay here. They'll find us if we do. Mark glanced back at his apartment. I don't have anywhere else to go. Elena's grip on his arm tightened slightly, her voice softening. We know a place, but it's a risk for all of us. Mark nodded. I'll take it. Let's go. Without wasting any more time, they headed down the street, moving quickly but quietly. Mark didn't ask where they were going. He didn't need to. He was already in too deep to turn back now. As they moved through the darkened streets, Mark felt the weight of what was happening sink in. He wasn't just dealing with two otherworldly women anymore. There was a real danger lurking out there, something powerful enough to destroy entire planets. And now he was caught up in it. The tension between them remained, but it had shifted. Where before there had been flirtation and teasing, now there was a shared urgency. The connection between them had deepened in a way Mark couldn't quite explain. Elena and Naya moved with purpose, their every step deliberate, but there was still that unmistakable spark between them, an unspoken chemistry that made Mark's heart race. After several minutes of navigating through the quiet streets, they arrived at a small, abandoned building on the edge of town. The windows were boarded up, and the place looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Here? Mark asked, raising an eyebrow. Naya nodded, stepping forward. It'll keep us hidden. For now. They entered the building, and Mark immediately felt the difference. The air inside was cool and still, but there was something else, something comforting, like they had stepped into a place that was out of time, safe for now. Elena led the way, her hand resting lightly on Mark's back as they walked through the dark hallways. Despite everything, her touch sent a familiar thrill through him, reminding him of the tension they had shared back in his apartment. Even with danger looming, there was something undeniable between them. Once they were settled in a small room, Elena turned to face him. Thank you, Mark, for trusting us. Mark shrugged, trying to play it cool, though his heart was still racing. I didn't really have a choice, did I? Naya chuckled softly from where she sat, watching the two of them with that playful glint still in her eyes. You could have run, but you didn't. Mark smiled, feeling a bit of the tension lift. Yeah, well, I guess I'm not the running type. Elena stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. You're not. The air between them grew heavy again, but this time, it wasn't the threat outside that hung over them. It was something else, something that had been building since the moment they first locked eyes. Naya stood up, moving toward them with that same graceful ease she'd had from the beginning. You know, Mark, she said, her voice low and teasing, we still haven't finished our lessons. Mark's pulse quickened, his gaze flicking between them. Lessons? Elena smiled, stepping so close that Mark could feel the heat from her body. We came here to learn, remember? Naya's fingers brushed lightly against his hand, sending another jolt of electricity through him. And there's still so much we don't know about you. Mark swallowed hard, feeling the tension between them rise to an almost unbearable level. His mind was screaming at him to think about the danger they were in, but his body wanted something else entirely. He took a deep breath, trying to regain control. Maybe we should focus on staying safe first. Elena's smile deepened, her eyes gleaming with a mix of amusement and desire. Oh, we're safe for now, Mark. Don't worry about that. Naya's fingers laced through his, her voice soft but insistent. Let's continue our exploration. The choice was his. Mark could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. But somehow he knew that whatever happened next, he wouldn't regret it. Mark stood in the center of the small, dimly lit room, his heart pounding in his chest as Elena and Naya moved closer. The air was thick with tension, and despite the looming danger outside, the connection between them was undeniable. He could feel their presence pulling him in, and it took all his willpower to focus on the situation at hand. Elena was the first to break the silence. "You're different, Mark. We've sensed it from the moment we arrived." Her voice was soft but commanding, as though she knew exactly how to keep him teetering on the edge of control. Naya, always the playful one, moved closer, her fingers lightly brushing against his arm once again. "We've encountered others on your world, but none like you. There's something about your energy, so open, so willing to explore." Mark swallowed hard, trying to keep his thoughts straight. "What do you mean? What makes me so different?" Elena exchanged a glance with Naya, their silent communication speaking volumes. "It's not just about what's happening between us," Elena said, her voice almost a whisper. "It's about who you are. We were drawn to you because of your openness, your ability to connect with things beyond your understanding." Naya's eyes sparkled as she leaned in. "You're not afraid of the unknown, Mark. Most people would have run when they saw us, but you didn't." Mark felt the heat rise in his cheeks, unsure if it was from their words or their proximity. "I guess. I've always been curious about what's out there." Elena smiled, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "That curiosity is what makes you special, and it's why we need you." Mark's mind raced. "Need me? For what?" Naya's playful demeanor shifted, her tone growing more serious. "Our kind, we're in danger. You saw what's happening outside. They're coming for us, and if they find us, we won't survive." Mark's pulse quickened. "Who's coming for you?" Elena's eyes darkened slightly, her voice laced with a quiet intensity. "The Sentinels. They're hunters, designed to track down beings like us. We escaped our planet before they could take control, but they've been following us across the galaxy." Mark's stomach twisted at the thought. "Why? What do they want from you?" Naya sighed, her gaze softening. "Our planet was once rich with resources, and we were its protectors. But the Sentinels want control. They've destroyed many worlds in their search for power. When we refused to hand over what was ours, they began hunting us." Elena stepped closer, her hand gently resting on Mark's chest. "We came to Earth because we believed it would be a safe haven. But they found us here too." Mark's mind raced as he processed the information. "So what are we supposed to do? How do we stop them?" Naya shook her head. "We can't stop them, not on our own. But we have a plan, a way to get off this planet before they catch us." Elena's fingers curled slightly against his chest, her eyes searching his. "And we need your help, Mark." Mark's breath caught in his throat. "My help? What can I do?" Elena's gaze softened, and for the first time since they had met, she looked vulnerable. "We have a ship hidden outside the city, but it's cloaked, and we need someone with your openness to unlock it." Mark blinked, confused. "Openness?" Naya nodded. "The ship is tied to a specific kind of energy, an energy we've only seen in a few individuals. You have it, Mark. You're the key to unlocking the ship and getting us off this planet." Mark felt the weight of their words settle on his shoulders. He hadn't asked for any of this, hadn't expected to be pulled into a galactic chase, but here he was, standing between two beautiful alien women who were relying on him to save their lives. Elena stepped even closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Will you help us, Mark?" Mark's mind spun, but in that moment, he knew what his answer had to be. He couldn't leave them to face this threat alone, not after everything they had been through, and not after the connection they had shared. "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "I'll help you." Elena's eyes lit up with relief, and she smiled softly. "Thank you, Mark. You don't know how much this means to us." Naya grinned, her playful nature returning. "I knew you'd say yes." Mark chuckled, but before he could respond, the sound of a distant crash echoed through the building. His heart leaped into his throat as he turned toward the sound. "What was that?" Elena's expression darkened. "They're here." Naya grabbed Mark's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "We need to move, now." Without another word, the three of them sprinted toward the exit, their footsteps echoing in the empty building. The green light outside had intensified, casting eerie shadows across the street as they stepped outside. Mark's pulse raced as he glanced up at the sky. There, silhouetted against the dark clouds, were three sleek black ships, hovering ominously above the city. "They've found us," Elena whispered, her eyes locked on the ships. Mark felt a surge of fear, but Naya squeezed his hand, her voice steady. "We still have time, the ship's not far." They ran through the deserted streets, the looming presence of the ships overhead driving them forward. Mark's lungs burned as he struggled to keep up, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't. Not now. Finally, they reached the edge of the city, where a dense forest stretched out before them. Elena led the way, her movements fluid and graceful, despite the urgency of the situation. Naya stayed close to Mark, her hand never leaving his. As they entered the forest, the air grew cooler, and the sound of the city faded into the distance. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small clearing. And there, hidden beneath a shimmering cloak of light, was the ship. Mark's eyes widened in awe. The ship was sleek and beautiful, unlike anything he had ever seen. Its surface glowed faintly, and the air around it seemed to hum with energy. "This is it," Naya said, her voice filled with excitement. "You're the key, Mark. Just place your hand on the panel." Mark approached the ship, his heart pounding. He reached out, his fingers trembling as they hovered over the control panel. The moment his hand made contact, a surge of energy shot through him, and the ship's cloak dissolved, revealing its full form. The doors slid open, and Elena smiled. "You did it!" Before Mark could respond, the sound of engines roared overhead. He looked up to see the sentinel ships descending toward the clearing. "They're coming!" Naya shouted. Elena grabbed Mark's arm, pulling him toward the ship. "We need to go, now!" They rushed inside, the doors sealing shut behind them. The ship's controls lit up, and Elena quickly took the pilot's seat, her hands flying over the controls. The ship lifted off the ground just as the Sentinel's weapons fired, but they were too late. The ship shot up into the sky, breaking through the atmosphere with incredible speed. As they soared through space, Mark finally allowed himself to breathe. He turned to Elena and Naya, who were both watching him with a mixture of relief and admiration. "You saved us," Naya said, her voice soft. Mark shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "I couldn't have done it without you." Elena stood up from the pilot's seat, walking over to him. "Thank you, Mark. You've done more than you know." Mark felt the tension that had been building all night finally begin to fade. They were safe, for now, and whatever came next, he knew he wouldn't face it alone. As they drifted through the stars, Elena and Naya took their places beside him, their hands resting lightly on his arms. The connection between them was undeniable, and as the ship sailed into the unknown, Mark couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning of an even greater adventure.